Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into something a little softer, a little stranger, and honestly a little more hopeful than anything humans have cooked up in centuries. Because tonight we're talking about the 2025 psychedelic revolution. Yes, the year magic mushrooms went from stoner punchline to FDA-approved medicine. Faster than your uncle went from Facebook doctor to crypto expert. So before you get too cozy, go ahead and like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And thank you for suggesting this topic. It's been such a fun one to unravel. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow it's always 1:37 AM for at least one of you. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for some soft white noise therapy, get comfortable, and maybe tuck your feet under a blanket so your anxiety can't nibble on them. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered how we got here? How a world that once panicked over teenagers eating Tide Pods is now handing out government-approved mushroom gummies? How did the same country that banned dancing in footloose towns somehow legalized a fungus that makes people talk to trees? Did scientists really just decide, yep, mushrooms are medicine now? What does a therapy session on psilocybin actually feel like? Do doctors have to sit there holding your hand while you cry about your elementary school goldfish? How did we go from just say no to just surrender to cosmic oneness? And perhaps most importantly, if magic mushrooms were used for thousands of years by ancient cultures, what exactly happened in the last century to make us collectively freak out about them? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the middle of one of the weirdest medical revolutions in modern history. The year is 2025. The FDA has approved psilocybin therapy. Therapists are booked out for months. Boomers are microdosing. Silicon Valley engineers are micro-optimizing. And somewhere in a dimly lit clinic decorated like a Wes Anderson movie, someone is meeting their inner child and apologizing for eating glue in 3rd grade. And now let's explore the worlds, the people, and the absurd stories that got us here. Long before you were anxiously Googling side effects of microdosing, ancient humans were throwing magic mushrooms into ceremonial fires and calling it Tuesday. You find yourself among early hunter-gatherers who stare into the void of existence with the calm confidence of people who haven't invented taxes yet. The air smells of smoke, damp earth, and old secrets. Let's talk about daily life here. You wake up on a bed of woven grasses that somehow feel more supportive than your expensive modern mattress. There are no alarm clocks, no notifications, no urgent emails from co-workers who mistake you for tech support. Just a rising sun, a few rustling leaves, and a faint sense that something with claws may be watching you from the bushes. It's peaceful in a mildly threatening way. The people around you don't speak your language, but they communicate just fine. They gesture, grunt, nod, and occasionally hand you a stick and expect you to do something with it. You nod back confidently, pretending you know the assignment, but mostly you're trying not to eat anything that will kill you. Ironically, you're surrounded by mushrooms that look deadly but are, historically speaking, the reason half of humanity believed the universe was shaped like a giant cosmic egg. The morning begins with a foraging trip. Everyone spreads out, scanning the forest floor for roots, berries, and their preferred brand of mind-expanding fungi. You try to keep up, stepping carefully to avoid snakes, spiders, and your own fear of nature. Before long, someone triumphantly holds up a mushroom the size of a toddler's fist. The group murmurs approvingly. You murmur too, because peer pressure transcends time. Back at camp, a fire crackles. Not the clean, eucalyptus-scented flame of a modern candle, but a smoky, chaotic blaze fed with sticks, bark, and whatever logs weren't already claimed by termites. People gather around, tossing mushrooms into the flame as casually as you toss spinach into a blender. This is not a recipe. This is a ritual. A soft chant rises, something rhythmic, ancient, and mildly off-key. It's soothing, though. Even your modern anxiety pauses to listen. You inhale the earthy aroma drifting through the air. It has a warmth to it, a heaviness, like breathing in a philosophy lecture taught by someone who's been barefoot since birth. The mushrooms aren't meant to be eaten for fun, they're meant to open a door, the kind you can't knock on and politely request entry. This door opens on its own, usually when you're least prepared. A shaman approaches you, a figure painted in ochre and charcoal, wearing feathers, bones, and the serene expression of someone who knows the universe, is full of surprises and is deeply unbothered by all of them. They place a hand on your shoulder, as if bracing you for the next several hours of expanded consciousness, which is ancient shorthand for things may get weird. Let's be clear, ancient mushroom ceremonies weren't about escaping reality. They were about diving into it head first, like doing emotional archaeology with your soul. As the smoke rises, you feel your mind soften, shapes blur, colours bloom. The fire no longer crackles, it whispers. The shaman hums a low note that vibrates somewhere behind your ribs, as if reminding you your skeleton is also invited to the experience. The group begins to sway. Not dramatically, this isn't a rave. It's more like gentle rocking. The movement of people who have accepted that the universe might be held together with string and good intentions. You sway too, partly because it looks meaningful and partly because your legs think they're on a boat. And then, without warning, everything feels connected. The trees breathe with you. The fire hums with you. Even the insects buzzing at your ankles seem to be offering emotional support. You're not frightened, you're fascinated. The world feels bigger, kinder, and more absurd than you ever imagined. By the time the ceremony winds down, you understand something your ancient friends always knew. Mushrooms weren't a drug to them. They were a conversation between humans, nature, and whatever cosmic customer service line was in charge of existence. And somehow, in this smoky clearing surrounded by people with zero dental care and infinite cosmic insight, you feel strangely at home. You watch a prehistoric man crouch beside a cluster of mushrooms. He sniffs one, shrugs, and eats it, because safety guidelines won't be invented for another 12,000 years. Minutes later, he's communing with clouds, convinced one of them is his grandfather. Let's talk about context here. You're deep in the Paleolithic era, a time with no user manuals, no warning labels, and no wise village elder saying things like, maybe don't lick that glowing fungus. Survival here is essentially one long improvisation. Every day is a combination of guesswork, panic, and enthusiastic curiosity. These people don't have Google, they have vibes. You follow the hunter, who now looks unusually peaceful for someone wearing a tunic made of fairly judgmental animal hide. He wanders in slow circles, patting trees and whispering apologies to rocks. The rest of the tribe watches from a respectful distance, not because they understand what's happening, but because they already know he once tried to fight a thunderstorm barehanded. You don't question this man's life choices. You simply brace for the outcome. Let's rewind a bit. How did we even get here? Earlier this morning, this same hunter was scanning the forest floor for edible roots. But mushrooms were confusing. Too small to be threatening, too colourful to trust, and too mysterious to ignore. They were nature's lottery. One bite, and you either gained a spiritual insight or lost the ability to walk in a straight line. Sometimes both. He picked the mushroom cluster with the solemn instinct of someone choosing a destiny card from a mystical deck. That's the thing about prehistoric humans, they didn't dabble, they committed. Meanwhile, you're standing behind him like a nervous parent wanting to say, hey buddy, maybe just don't. But the past is a lawless place. As the mushroom's effects settle in, his perception expands in the way modern mindfulness apps always promise but never deliver. He looks toward the horizon, eyes wide with revelation. You half expect him to invent yoga right here. Instead, he places both hands on the ground, presses his cheek to the soil and whispers, Mother Earth is warm today. You check. She is not. The tribe, confused but intrigued, begins inching closer. One woman pokes the abandoned mushroom patch with a stick, immediately regretting her curiosity. Another man, braver or perhaps more bored, asks the hunter what he sees. The hunter smiles gently, pointing at a large cumulus drifting lazily across the sky. That one, he says, is Grandfather Cloud. He forgives me. Everyone nods, because when a man starts receiving weather-based forgiveness, you don't interrupt. Let's compare this to modern life. Today, you'd call a clinic, fill out 3 forms, sign a waiver promising not to operate machinery, and pay a therapist to sit nearby while you unravel your childhood trauma. But here, the closest thing to a therapist is a guy named Uga, who thinks dreams are messages from large birds. And yet, for all its chaos, there's something soothing about watching humanity's first psychedelic moment unfold. The hunter isn't overwhelmed, he's delighted. His worries, which mostly consist of saber-toothed cats, and whether the tribe likes his decorative necklace, seem to melt away. Instead, he starts reorganizing sticks into patterns that absolutely mean something to him, even if they look suspiciously like a lopsided tic-tac-toe board. By now, more tribe members are gathering, whispering among themselves. They aren't sure if he's blessed and cursed or just very committed to personal growth. One young man approaches the mushrooms with the expression of someone about to make a questionable life choice. You brace yourself. He sniffs one, hesitates, then decides he's seen enough weirdness for one day. Wisdom comes in many forms. Sometimes it looks like backing away slowly. Eventually, as the effects fade, the hunter sits down, exhaling deeply. He looks lighter, calmer, like a man who has briefly peeked behind the cosmic curtain and found it surprisingly well organized. And without realizing it, you've just witnessed one of the earliest breakthroughs in human consciousness. No scientific studies, no FDA reviews, just a hunter, a mushroom, and a moment of unexpected transcendence that will echo through human history like a softly whispered secret. Because sometimes great discoveries don't come from genius. They come from someone licking the wrong rock. Welcome to the bustling temples of the Aztec world, where priests consume Teonatecatl, the flesh of the gods. You're surrounded by chanting, incense, and the distinct feeling that someone is about to over-explain cosmic consciousness. Let's set the scene. You're standing on a stone platform overlooking Tenochtitlan, one of the most sophisticated cities on Earth at the time, buzzing with markets, floating gardens, and people who somehow figured out civilization long before indoor plumbing showed up. The temple itself rises like a giant cosmic staircase, each step reminding you how out of shape you are. Around you, priests move with the calm efficiency of people who know exactly how the universe works and are slightly annoyed you don't. A bowl sits before them, carved stone, intricately etched, holding mushrooms speckled in vibrant patterns that look both holy and suspicious. This is not a snack. This is a hotline to the divine. One priest lifts a mushroom reverently, the same way modern baristas lift artisanal single-origin beans, and begins an invocation that sounds like a cross between a prayer and a TED talk about transcendence. The chanting swells. The air thickens with the warm scent of copal incense, which burns with the smoky authority of a spiritual bouncer telling your ego it will not be entering tonight. You look around. Everyone seems to understand the ritual except you. You nod solemnly anyway, adopting the universal expression humans use when pretending to follow complex instructions. The priests consume the mushrooms, each bite slow, deliberate, and accompanied by murmurs that suggest they are on very good terms with at least 4 major deities. Within minutes their pupils widen, their expressions soften, and the chanting shifts from synchronized choir to something more like emotional jazz. Let's talk about why they're doing this. For the Aztecs, Teotihuacan wasn't an escape, it was a meeting, a chance to converse with gods, ancestors, cosmic forces, and perhaps the occasional metaphorical serpent who had constructive feedback about your life choices. Modern therapy asks, how does that make you feel? Aztec mushroom ceremonies ask, would you like to discuss this directly with the spiritual architect of the universe? As the mushrooms take hold, the priests begin to sway in gentle, rhythmic arcs. It's not dramatic. No flailing, no chaos. Just slow waves of movement, like a crowd at a concert where everyone agreed to experience their emotions quietly. The temple stones seem to glow. The sky deepens into impossible colours. Even the air vibrates faintly, as if tuning itself to a higher frequency you are not invited to choose. One priest steps toward you, eyes shining with kindness and a little mischief. He gestures for you to sit beside him. You comply because when someone who communes with gods beckons, you don't decline. You sit immediately and hope you don't embarrass yourself. He closes his eyes and murmurs something. You're fairly sure it translates to "the universe breathes with us," though it could also mean "my feet hurt from these stairs." It's hard to tell. The tone is the same. Around you, visions bloom, not yours, but theirs. Sacred symbols dance in their minds. They see patterns woven into reality, threads connecting people, stories, places, even the occasional jaguar who wanders into ceremonial metaphors uninvited. Insights burst through the ritual like sparks. For them, this isn't recreational, it's revelation. A cosmic group meeting with better visuals. And here's the wild part. This wasn't fringe behaviour. This was central to Aztec spirituality. They believed mushrooms were bridges, not metaphors, actual bridges, between physical life and the divine. Today we'd call that altered consciousness. Back then, it was just a normal Thursday. As the ceremony winds down, the priests sit quietly, grounding themselves, breathing deeply. They look calm, centered, renewed, like people who just consulted the Cosmic User Manual and found the troubleshooting section surprisingly helpful. You rise with them, feeling the weight of the moment. You haven't taken part, but you've witnessed something ancient, intentional, and profoundly human. Our endless search for meaning, connection, and understanding. And as the last of the incense fades into the sky, you realize these weren't just divine snacks. They were tools, sacred, powerful, and treated with the kind of respect you only give to something that opens doors inside you and possibly introduces you to a god with strong opinions about your personal growth. Now you're wandering through medieval Europe, where anything mildly interesting is immediately labelled witchcraft. Mushrooms? Definitely the devil's Doritos. Let's set the mood. The wind is cold, the sky is grey, and everything smells faintly of smoke, livestock, and existential dread. You walk through a village where houses lean like they were built by contractors who had strong opinions but no architectural training. The people here move with brisk purpose, clutching rosaries and side-eyeing anything that looks remotely unusual, including you, your shoes, and definitely the little fungus patch growing near the well. In this world, curiosity is not encouraged, it's suspicious. If something grows too fast, too slow, too strangely, or just in a slightly unsettling shade of beige, someone is getting accused of consorting with demons. And mushrooms? Mushrooms hit every item on the medieval, absolutely not checklist. They pop up overnight without permission. They taste strange. They look magical. They sometimes cause hallucinations. That's 4 red flags and a bonus flag for being vaguely squishy. Let's talk about the villagers. You approach a group huddled near a fire, simple peasants wrapped in itchy wool layers, their faces weathered by cold and a lifetime of receiving dubious medical advice. They notice the mushroom cluster near the path and instantly back away like it's about to recite forbidden scripture. One woman crosses herself so aggressively she nearly dislocates her shoulder. A local priest arrives, summoned by whispers of fungal mischief. He peers down at the mushrooms with the same cautious expression modern people reserve for emails that begin with "per my last message." He pokes one with a stick and nods grimly. "Witchcraft," he declares, or possibly fairies. Either way, fetch the bucket. Someone brings water. Someone else grabs a broom. No one is sure what the plan is, but medieval problem-solving relies heavily on enthusiasm and very little on science. Let's compare this to modern life for a moment. Today, you can walk into a climate-controlled therapy centre, sip herbal tea, and prepare for a psilocybin-assisted session, guided by a licensed professional with a playlist that includes soft piano and ocean sounds. In medieval Europe, if you so much as found a mushroom shaped like a smiley face, you'd be burned for heresy before it had a chance to ruin your lunch. The villagers gesture for you to stay back as they attempt to remove the mushrooms without touching them. Tools include a shovel, a stray dog, and a surprising amount of prayer. Someone whispers, "My cousin ate one once immediately started speaking in tongues." Another villager replies, "He was 3. That was babbling." The first villager does not acknowledge this correction. But here's the thing. Mushrooms did sometimes cause strange behaviour. Between poisonous varieties, accidental intoxication, and ergot-infested rye bread, medieval people were experiencing hallucinations far more often than they'd like to admit, and without scientific understanding, those experiences were quickly attributed to supernatural forces. Imagine having a mild psychedelic episode in a place where the dominant reaction to everything is, "Burn it before it learns our names." You wander farther down the road, past a manor house where the noble family also fears mushrooms, but for different reasons. Nobles don't accuse mushrooms of witchcraft. They accuse them of being low-class food. If it doesn't come from a hunted animal, or a kitchen servant who owes you lifelong fealty, it's not making it onto their table. Mushrooms are for peasants and demons in that order. At a nearby monastery, monks catalogue herbs and plants with surprising accuracy. Except mushrooms. Mushrooms get vague descriptions like bad, evil, or temptation pods, depending on which monk is writing. One stressed scribe has even added a footnote, "Avoid unless starving or visited by the Holy Spirit." Night falls. You walk past the forest edge, where mushrooms glow faintly in the moonlight. Beautiful, eerie, and entirely misunderstood. The locals scurry away, muttering about curses, omens, and the importance of minding one's business. And here, in the shadowy medieval dark, you realise something funny. While the Aztecs were communing with cosmic gods through mushroom rituals, medieval Europe was too busy panicking to discover anything deeper than "do not touch that." 0 mushrooms, maximum fear. A cultural moment defined entirely by the world's most dramatic overreaction. And somewhere nearby, a single mushroom sits quietly, wondering why humans in this era are so exhausting. You materialise beside R. Gordon Wasson, a New York banker who discovers magic mushrooms in Mexico and writes about it like he's describing a risky investment portfolio. Wall Street meets wall-melting hallucinations. Let's ease into the scene. You're standing in the humid night air of Oaxaca in the early 1950s. Crickets chirp, lanterns flicker, and a soft breeze carries the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint aroma of a banker sweating gently through his starched shirt. Wasson adjusts his tie even though he's miles from the nearest boardroom, because he's the kind of man who believes a well-pressed collar can solve most natural disasters. He's here with a notebook, a camera, and the cautious optimism of someone who once audited a grocery store chain, and considers that an adventure. But tonight he's after something different, Teonagatl, the sacred mushrooms used in Aztec ceremonies led by curandera Maria Sabina. This is not a man seeking thrills. This is a man seeking well. Honestly, he's not fully sure. Cultural research, he tells himself. His eyebrows suggest he's hoping the culture isn't too lively. As villagers gather for the ceremony, Wasson scribbles notes like he's rating bonds. Atmosphere, strong. Chanting, stable. Potential for spiritual transformation, moderate to high risk. You follow him into a dim hut glowing with candlelight. The curandera sits beside a table of mushrooms that look like they were grown by a moonlit gardener with a flair for mysticism. Let's make a modern comparison. Today people book mushroom retreats with websites, disclaimers and Spotify playlists labelled Deep Inner Journey. Back then, Wasson was relying on handwritten directions, prayers, and blind trust that no one in the room had beef with American bankers. Very different onboarding experience. Maria Sabina begins the ritual. Her chanting flows like water sliding over stone, calm, rhythmic, ancient. Wasson attempts to relax, but since he's never relaxed once in his professional life, it's not going well. Still, he accepts the mushrooms with both hands, because declining would be rude, and also because his curiosity has now outpaced his risk tolerance. Minutes pass, the candle flames bend and blur. The room sways gently, as if rocking on the tide. Wasson blinks, stiffens, and clutches his notebook like a flotation device. You can almost hear his internal monologue. Ah, yes, this is unexpected. Market volatility is high, vision integrity fluctuating. Strong buy? Strong buy. The walls begin to glow with symbols, intricate patterns, spirals, shapes that feel like memories you haven't lived yet. Wasson exhales sharply, then laughs once, short and startled, like someone who's just been told his retirement plan is sentient. The villagers ease into the experience gracefully. They're used to this. Wasson, however, experiences his consciousness unfolding like a corporate report rendered in cosmic calligraphy. He tries to take notes. His pen hovers over the paper. He writes, "The universe is enormous." Then underneath, "Recommend expansion." The mushrooms deepen their hold. He feels waves of emotion, wonder, awe, the sudden certainty that everything is connected and possibly filing quarterly reports. At one point he touches the wooden floor and whispers, "This has excellent structural integrity." You pat his shoulder sympathetically. Even in transcendence, he can't stop talking like a banker. Hours pass. Visions surge and soften. He sees colours that have never existed in the corporate world. He sees animals forming patterns, dancing through memories of markets, rising and falling like ocean tides. He feels perhaps for the first time small, humbled, and astonishingly alive. When the ceremony ends, he stumbles out under the night sky, blinking like a newborn accountant. The stars above look impossibly sharp. The air feels electric. The world seems bigger and kinder, and he is absolutely going to write about all of this in Life magazine with the tone of a man reviewing an otherworldly IPO. And so he does. His article explodes across America, sending curious minds searching for the divine mushroom. He doesn't know it yet, but this single cultural collision, one banker, one ceremony, one very intense spiritual audit, will spark an entire psychedelic renaissance. All because R. Gordon Wasson licked the right life experience at exactly the right moment. Suddenly you're in a sterile government lab where men in suits wonder if mushrooms can be used for mind control. Spoiler. Not really, unless you're trying to make someone hug a lamp. Let's set the temperature. It's the 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing. Everyone is suspicious. Everyone is tense. Somewhere someone is building a bunker just in case the neighbour looks at them funny. The air inside this lab smells like disinfectant, stale coffee and mild paranoia. You stand quietly in the corner while a group of very serious men with very narrow ties gather around a metal table. On it sits a small dish of dried mushrooms looking innocent. Tragically innocent. Like they wandered into the wrong genre entirely. One agent clears his throat. "Gentlemen," he says, adjusting his glasses, "the Soviets may already be experimenting with psychological weapons. Psychological weapons." You glance at the mushrooms. They appear deeply uninterested in geopolitics. This is the era of MK-Ultra, secret experiments, and a firm belief that if you just throw enough chemicals at a problem, you might unlock telepathy, remote viewing, or at the very least improved lunch breaks. LSD is already circulating in classified circles. Psilocybin has entered the chat. The logic goes something like this. If mushrooms alter consciousness, could they be weaponized? Could they make spies talk? Could they make foreign leaders compliant? Could they perhaps create a super soldier who questions the nature of reality before battle? The answer, as history gently reveals, is mostly no. Let's talk about the experiment. You watch as a volunteer, though volunteer may be a flexible term, sits in a metal chair under fluorescent lighting that feels personally hostile. He's handed a dose of psilocybin with all the ceremony of someone being given a cough drop. No incense, no chanting, no shaman, just clipboards. Within an hour, the man begins blinking slowly at the ceiling tiles. He squints at one corner of the room, then leans toward a nearby desk lamp. "Sir?" one agent asks. The volunteer gently embraces the lamp. "I understand you," he whispers. "This is not the mind control breakthrough the CIA was hoping for." Let's compare environments for a moment. In Oaxaca, psilocybin is taken in candlelit rooms guided by spiritual leaders who prepare participants for introspection and emotional release. In this lab, it's taken under buzzing lights while a man named Harold writes subject-hugging light fixture on a clipboard. Set and setting, as modern researchers will later emphasize, matter quite a lot. The agents exchange concerned glances. One flips through notes. Is he compromised? No, another replies. He's affectionate. Over the next several weeks, more experiments unfold. Some participants laugh uncontrollably. Others grow contemplative. One reportedly becomes convinced the filing cabinet is breathing. No one becomes a programmable puppet. Instead of unlocking psychic warfare, the mushrooms seem to unlock feelings, empathy, vulnerability, a sudden urge to question why everyone in the room is wearing identical grey suits, which, in the Cold War, might actually be considered dangerous. Because here's the thing, psychedelics don't make you obedient. They tend to do the opposite. They dissolve rigid thinking. They soften the ego. They ask uncomfortable questions like, why are we all so afraid? And what if hugging the lamp is actually the healthiest response here? By the end of the decade, government enthusiasm cools. Mushrooms are not reliable interrogation tools. They don't create hypnotized agents. They do, however, occasionally create bureaucrats who briefly reconsider their life choices. And that is not ideal for maintaining national tension. You step outside the lab into the cold Washington air. Somewhere across the ocean, rival nations are engaged in the same frantic search for mental advantage. Yet here you are, watching intelligence agencies misunderstand a fungus that ancient cultures treated with reverence. The CIA wanted control. The mushrooms offered perspective, and perspective, in an era built on fear, might have been the most radical substance of all. Meanwhile, back in the lab, Harold is still writing reports. Conclusion, he mutters. Mushrooms unlikely to secure global dominance. High probability of lamp-related bonding. History moves on. The mushrooms wait patiently. They've outlasted empires before. Harvard, 1960. Students are pretending to study while secretly planning mushroom-fueled epiphanies. Dr. Leary encourages everyone to turn on, tune in, and maybe skip their midterms forever. Let's step into the lecture hall. The room smells faintly of chalk dust, old books, and youthful ambition. You're seated at a wooden desk carved with decades of anxious initials. Outside, autumn leaves drift across the Cambridge campus, like they've also been thinking deeply about existence. At the front of the room stands Timothy Leary, psychologist, professor, and increasingly enthusiastic ambassador of altered consciousness. He smiles with the calm intensity of a man who's discovered something very interesting and has no intention of keeping it quiet. The Harvard psilocybin project is underway. On paper, it's serious research, carefully controlled experiments, psychological evaluations, questionnaires with phrases like mystical type experience and personality transformation, very academic, very respectable. In practice, it's also a room full of bright young minds discovering that the universe might be significantly more flexible than previously advertised. Let's talk about the students. You're sitting among them now, future lawyers, poets, maybe one future dentist who will later describe this as a formative but confusing semester. They nod thoughtfully during lectures, but later gather in dorm rooms where jazz records spin softly and conversations spiral into questions like, what if reality is just layered? The first sessions are structured. Volunteers lie down on couches, eye shades, classical music, clipboards nearby. Researchers observe carefully, trying to measure transcendence with standardized scales. And then something unexpected happens. Students don't just report visual distortions, they report profound personal insights, a sudden sense of unity, a soft dissolving of social armour. Some describe encountering what feels like sacred presence. Others simply feel for the first time that their anxiety has taken the afternoon off. Leary watches this unfold with growing conviction. He begins to believe these experiences aren't side effects, they're the point. Now let's compare this to modern campus life. Today, a student experimenting with mushrooms might Google dosage calculators, read Reddit threads, and text 3 friends. Is this normal? In 1960, you're sitting in a wood-panelled office while a Harvard professor calmly asks, "Describe your ego dissolution." It's all very civilized. At least at first. As word spreads, the experiments expand beyond tightly controlled research. Sessions become more frequent. The line between study and lifestyle begins to blur like watercolour on wet paper. Leary's message grows louder. Psychedelics aren't just tools for therapy, they're catalysts for cultural evolution. They challenge authority, they question systems. They suggest that perhaps society's rigid structures could use a gentle melting, which, to be fair, is not what university administrators signed up for. Soon, concerns ripple through Harvard's halls. Are students focusing on coursework? Or are they contemplating the interconnectedness of all living things while ignoring calculus? The answer appears to be both, but with varying enthusiasm. Leary becomes less cautious. He steps beyond academia, speaking publicly about consciousness expansion. Turn on, tune in, drop out. A slogan that feels inspiring if you're 20 and mildly alarming if you're a dean. You wander across campus one evening. Dorm windows glow softly. Inside, small groups sit cross-legged, discussing philosophy with the seriousness usually reserved for tax audits. Some are thoughtful, some are giggling at the way curtains breathe. The psychedelic boom is beginning. But here's the quiet irony. The original research suggested something subtle. Under supportive conditions, psilocybin could produce meaningful, even lasting psychological change. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was exploration. Yet as enthusiasm grows louder and cultural shifts accelerate, nuance gets lost. What began as controlled study drifts toward counterculture anthem. And once politics enters the conversation, subtlety rarely survives. Still, In these early Harvard days, there's a softness, a curiosity, a sense that human consciousness might be far wider than textbooks suggested. You sit in the lecture hall as Leary finishes a talk. Students lean forward, eyes bright with possibility. Outside, leaves continue to fall. Inside, minds quietly open. And somewhere between a research questionnaire and a dorm room jazz record, a cultural wave has begun, one that will ripple far beyond ivy-covered walls. Midterms, unfortunately, remain scheduled. Cosmic revelation does not excuse you from statistics. Now it's the 1980s. Hair is big, fear is bigger, and politicians declare mushrooms more dangerous than your cousin Chad's lifted pickup truck. Let's step into the scene. Neon signs glow, synth bass thrums through the streets, shoulder pads are aggressive. Everything feels like it was designed by someone who thought subtlety was a government plot. You're wandering past convenience stores stocked with tab soda and VHS rentals when the TV in a shop window blares a special report. Psychedelic substances, once subjects of quiet research, are now public enemy number one. You smell hairspray, cigarette smoke, and the unmistakable scent of moral panic. Politicians line up behind podiums, holding charts that look like they were drawn by someone who had never met a statistic. A senator dramatically points at a mushroom clip art image printed in grainy black and white, insisting it could corrupt America's youth faster than MTV. Another warns that psychedelic experiences may permanently detach individuals from reality, which is bold considering half the country is currently wearing parachute pants. Let's talk about messaging. Everywhere you look, posters scream, "Just say no." Commercials air during every program, always starring a concerned parent, a confused teenager, and a frying pan used metaphorically in a way that makes you hungry instead of afraid. Your brain on drugs looks suspiciously like breakfast. You wander into a living room where a family is glued to the TV watching a public service announcement. A solemn narrator intones, "Even one mushroom can destroy your future." The teen on screen looks directly into the camera, as if trying to apologize for something unrelated like not folding laundry. The tone is not subtle. This era believes softness is weakness, and nuance is treason. Meanwhile, scientists who once studied psychedelics are quietly packing their research into cardboard boxes. Grants dry up. Universities shut down labs. Anything with the word consciousness in the title is treated like a contagious rash. You watch one researcher sigh as he shoves a stack of promising results into a filing cabinet that will not be opened again for decades. Let's compare this to modern life. Today, researchers write peer-reviewed studies showing that psilocybin can reduce depression, ease existential distress, and open emotional pathways previously sealed shut. In the 1980s, scientists were being told mushrooms might turn citizens into anarchists who paint cosmic murals on federal buildings. Context matters. Public perception flips almost overnight. Psychedelics, once associated with therapy, healing and introspection, become symbols of rebellion and moral decay. New segments show tie-dye shirts, drum circles, and blurred footage of young people doing absolutely nothing threatening, but accompanied by music that suggests imminent doom. Fear sells, fear also votes. Fear. You walk through a school hallway lined with posters explaining that if you ingest a mushroom, you will immediately lose all ambition, your GPA, and possibly your ability to operate a microwave. Teachers give the same lecture every year, reading from pamphlets written by people who seem to think fungi have personal vendettas. But here's the thing. Underneath the slogans and the panic, real suffering goes unaddressed. Veterans return from war with trauma. Patients with depression slip through cracks. People in pain look for relief in a system offering little more than platitudes and pharmaceuticals. The war on drugs doesn't just criminalize substances, It criminalizes curiosity, healing, and the idea that consciousness might be more than a chemical imbalance to be subdued. You wander past a police station where officers discuss new crackdowns. Someone pins a mugshot on a corkboard. The crime? Possession of a substance used in sacred rituals for thousands of years. The severity feels wildly disproportionate, like being sentenced to 5 years for owning an unlicensed toaster. As the decade progresses, enforcement intensifies. Prisons overflow, communities fracture, fear becomes policy, and mushrooms, innocent, unbothered mushrooms, continue to grow quietly in forests, blissfully unaware they've become the botanical face of societal collapse. The door has slammed shut on psychedelic research, bolted, triple locked, and labelled "Do Not Open." Seriously, we mean it. But doors don't stay shut forever. They creak, they shift, and sometimes all it takes is a new generation asking better questions. For now, though, the 1980s stand firm. Big hair, big panic, and absolutely no room for nuance. In a cosy, candle-lit basement filled with tapestries, therapists continue to use mushrooms quietly, whispering things like, "Don't worry, Karen, the carpet's supposed to breathe." Let's settle into the scene. The year is somewhere between 1975 and 2005, hard to pinpoint because time down here feels like it's wearing fuzzy socks and drinking herbal tea. The space is warm, dim, and decorated with enough woven textiles to make you wonder if the local craft fair was robbed. Someone has set out a plate of cookies that definitely came from a grocery store bakery, but they're arranged with spiritual intention. Above ground, the war on drugs is roaring. Words like Schedule 1 substance hang over society like storm clouds. But down here, healing quietly continues. You're sitting on a beanbag chair so soft it might actually be a sentient creature. A salt lamp glows in the corner. Incense drifts through the air in slow, lazy coils, like it also has trauma it's working through. Across from you sits a therapist wearing loose, earth-toned clothing, and the kind of gentle smile that says, "I know a lot about emotional wounds and also how to grow tomatoes." They speak softly, reassuringly, and entirely without judgment. This isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake, it's necessity. People are suffering, and these therapists have seen too many breakthroughs to stop. Let's talk about the clients. You watch as a woman named Karen, sadly not the modern meme version, just a tired middle-aged human being with a clogged emotional inbox, lies on a floor mat, wrapped in a blanket patterned with stars. She's breathing slowly, her eyes are closed. Every now and then she whispers something like, "I feel like my childhood is dissolving." The therapist nods, like this is normal, which, in this basement, it is. A man in the next room is journaling vigorously about forgiveness. Another is quietly weeping because he suddenly realized trees have been supporting him emotionally for years. These sessions aren't wild, chaotic trips. They're structured, guided, intentional. Mushrooms aren't used to escape reality, they're used to face it more gently. Let's compare this to modern therapy. Today, psilocybin studies happen in sleek medical offices, where clinicians wear lab coats and start sentences with phrases like, "statistically significant reduction in depressive symptoms." Down here, healing happens with herbal tea, chamomile, and a cat who shows up at emotionally crucial moments. But despite the comfort, there's an underlying tension. Every knock on the basement door triggers a moment of hush. Therapists speak in coded language on the phone. "We're doing a deep relaxation retreat on Saturday." Supplies are stored in innocuous containers labelled things like organic granola. "Do not eat." This is mental health work conducted with the same secrecy as an illicit knitting club. You listen as one therapist talks about their mission. They've watched traditional treatments fail people again and again. They've witnessed mushrooms unlock grief frozen for decades, dissolve fear, soften the edges of unbearable memories. They've seen people leave a session with a quietness in their chest they never thought possible. How do you stop offering that because a law book says you should? The carpet under your feet ripples gently. Oh, right, that's the mushrooms working on Karen's perception, not the carpet doing gymnastics. The therapist reassures her again, it's okay, you're safe, and hands her a tissue as though passing sacred treasure. Hours pass like minutes. People emerge from sessions with puffy eyes, relieved smiles, and the posture of someone who just unburdened their soul. They drink water, they share reflections, they hug, softly, intentionally. This basement is a sanctuary disguised as a rec room. And here's the quiet truth. While governments waged war, these therapists waged tenderness. While institutions banned substances, these individuals preserved wisdom. They tended to the wounded when the official system turned its back. They kept the flame alive. By the time you step back up the basement stairs, you realize something. Revolutions don't always start loudly. Sometimes they begin in a basement with a candle, a blanket, and someone whispering, "You're safe. Keep going." You stroll through a modern research lab where everything smells like hand sanitizer and hope. Scientists are shocked to discover mushrooms might actually help people instead of turning them into tie-dye wizards. Let's take a moment to appreciate the vibe shift. After decades of moral panic, political speeches and pamphlets claiming mushrooms would unravel society like a poorly knit sweater. You're now standing in a building with spotless floors, humming fluorescent lights, and researchers who use words like mechanism, therapeutic window, and statistically significant, which is nerd code for we think this actually works. Clipboards everywhere, stainless steel counters, machines that beep with clinical authority, a whiteboard covered in diagrams that resemble both brain maps and the scribbles of an over-caffeinated toddler. A young researcher in a lab coat greets you with contagious enthusiasm. She smells faintly of coffee, stress, and 9 years of student loans. "We're studying psilocybin for depression," she says, then adds with a deadpan shrug, "Turns out it doesn't melt your brain." Who knew? You follow her down a hallway lined with therapy rooms. Calm, quiet spaces furnished with soft lighting, comfortable couches, and playlists specifically engineered to make your emotions open like a blooming flower at yoga retreat. One room even has a weighted blanket folded neatly on a chair, waiting like a loyal emotional support pancake. Let's compare the environment. In the 1960s, consciousness expansion was happening in dorms filled with patchouli, incense smoke, and half-finished philosophy homework. In the 1980s, the only investigation happening was a DARE officer yelling about how drugs turn your neurons into sparkly confetti. But today you're in a building funded by grants, ethics committees, and donors who used to invest in biotech and finally decided investing in mental health was also allowed. You peek into another room where a participant rests with eye shades on and headphones playing soothing ambient music, the kind that sounds like a glacier humming thoughtfully. A therapist sits nearby, notepad ready, offering the gentle presence of someone who's seen hundreds of people cry about childhood memories, pet goldfish, and the universe all in the same hour. Scientists observe brain scans in the adjacent lab. On one monitor, colourful waves ripple across a neural map. A researcher taps the screen excitedly. Look, increased connectivity between networks. Another nods. Fascinating. The default mode network dissolves. You nod too, despite having no idea what that means, because nodding in a lab makes you feel smarter. What they're discovering, or rediscovering really, is something ancient cultures already knew. Psilocybin doesn't shut the brain off. It opens it. It softens rigid patterns. It quiets the inner narrator who won't stop reminding you of embarrassing things you said in 2009. Instead, It lets information flow between regions of the brain that usually keep to themselves, like awkward co-workers at an office potluck. You watch a scientist present findings to the team. Participants report reduced depression, reduced anxiety, improved well-being, an increased sense of meaning, she says. Another raises a hand. Any negative effects? Well, she replies, one participant cried because he realized his houseplants deserved better lighting. Everyone nods solemnly. A tragedy. The data piles up. Published studies spread. Headlines appear. Magic mushroom compound shows promise in treating depression. Pharmaceutical companies raise their eyebrows. Clinicians lean closer. Suddenly the world remembers that mushrooms are not mischievous troublemakers. They're medicine with a sense of humor. Researchers continue refining dosing, mapping the experience, perfecting the environment. They debate things like ideal playlist tempo, room temperature, and whether lavender scent enhances cosmic insight. It's all very scientific. And yet, underneath the spreadsheets and graphs, there's a quiet awe, a sense that something simple, old, and astonishing is returning to the modern world, not as counterculture rebellion, but as evidence-based therapy. As you leave the lab, you catch two scientists whispering in the hallway. So mushrooms help? Apparently. But didn't people say that 50 years ago? Yes. And thousands of years before that? Yes. A long quiet pause. So we're late? Very. You step back into the bright hallway, listening to the soft hum of machines and the steady rhythm of discovery. Science is finally catching up to the fungi. Again, you sit beside patients facing the end of life who describe their mushroom sessions as gently stepping into warm cosmic acceptance instead of existential dread. Even you feel your shoulders unclench. Let's settle into this setting quietly. You're in a calm, sunlit therapy room. One of those modern spaces with soft chairs, warm lamps, and plants that seem to be thriving beyond the abilities of ordinary houseplant owners. A quiet hum fills the air, part air purifier, part gentle reassurance. Outside, the world is loud and busy. Inside, time feels like it has taken a deep breath and decided to move slower. The patients here carry stories etched into their posture, their voices, their silences. Some speak openly, others sit with their hands folded, clutching the threads of a life that suddenly feels too short. These are people who have heard sentences with words like terminal, months, and no remaining treatment. Words that fall on the human heart like stones. But today, something different is happening. Something soft, something ancient and scientifically modern at the same time. A therapist moves quietly between chairs, placing headphones onto a patient, adjusting a weighted blanket over another. Their voice is gentle, steady, practiced, not clinical or detached, but compassionate in a way that feels shockingly rare. "You're safe," they whisper. "We're here the whole time." Let's compare this to traditional Western medicine. Usually addressing end-of-life anxiety involves pamphlets, sedatives, or very uncomfortable conversations held in fluorescent-lit hospital rooms, where a machine beeps every 4 seconds just to remind you you're mortal. But here the approach is almost ceremonial. Mushrooms aren't being used recreationally. They're being used intentionally, respectfully, like keys to a door that fear has bolted shut. The session begins quietly, eye shades, music, slow breathing. And then, gradually something shifts. You listen as one patient, a woman whose hands tremble slightly, begins describing her experience afterward. "It was like stepping into a warm room," she says. "A room I've known my whole life but forgot existed." Her shoulders drop. Her face softens. She isn't smiling exactly. It's something gentler than that, an unburdening. Another patient explains how his fear evaporated. "I wasn't dying," he says. "I was returning." He chuckles, surprised by his own words, like someone remembering the punchline of a joke the universe told him decades ago. A third patient, younger than you expected, describes seeing her life laid out like a woven tapestry. Every thread mattered, she says quietly, even the ones I hated. Her eyes glisten, but she isn't sad. She's relieved. You watch the therapist listen, not interrupting, not analysing, just witnessing. The room feels sacred, not because of ritual objects or iconography, but because of presence. Here, vulnerability is not something to fear, it's honoured. Let's bring in the science for a moment. Researchers sit behind mirrored glass, observing heart rates, emotional responses, and long-term psychological shifts. They are trained to be objective, but even they occasionally lean back in their chairs, exhaling slowly as if they've just been reminded of something human, something important, that mushrooms can reduce existential distress by dissolving the walls the mind builds when it's terrified, that they can quiet the relentless narrative of what if, what then, what now, that they can open a window in a room that felt locked from the inside. As you continue listening, you realise these sessions aren't about escaping death. They're about meeting it with clarity instead of panic, meaning instead of dread, softness instead of terror. One man describes a vision of floating in a vast ocean of light. I wasn't alone, he says. Everything was connected, comforting, familiar. A woman describes feeling held, like being embraced by something enormous and loving, she says. Not a person, more like life itself. You sit there quietly, unsure where to place your hands or your feelings. You didn't expect to feel your own fear loosen, but it does. Not because you've had a session, but because watching these people reclaim peace from the jaws of fear is its own kind of medicine. As the session ends, the therapists gather blankets, switch off music, and offer water. Patients sit up slowly. Some stretch. Some laugh. Some cry softly. But all of them look lighter, like people who walked into a storm and found sunlight waiting on the other side. And in this quiet room, filled with people who have every reason to fear the end, you witness something astonishing. For the first time in a long time, they don't. Welcome to Silicon Valley, where sleep-deprived programmers are nibbling mushrooms like vitamin gummies and claiming it increased productivity by at least 3.7%. Let's ease into the environment. You're walking through an open-concept office where everything is white, glass, or attempting to look like the future. There are meditation pods, kombucha taps, and one very confused fern attempting to oxygenate a room filled with glowing screens. The air smells faintly of cold brew, ambition, and someone's eucalyptus essential oil diffuser that HR keeps asking them to turn down. This is the birthplace of the microdosing renaissance, an era where billionaires, founders, interns, Android developers, and people who haven't slept since Tuesday gather to reconsider their relationship with mushrooms. Not the kind grilled on burgers, the kind that allegedly help you optimize your neuropsychological throughput, which is tech bro language for feel slightly less dead inside. You pass a row of engineers hunched over ergonomic chairs that cost more than your first car. One taps away furiously, jaw clenched, pupils dilated just enough to suggest he's either on the brink of a breakthrough or a meltdown. He whispers, "The colours make more sense now, like this is a completely normal workplace observation." Another programmer explains his microdosing schedule with the seriousness of a surgeon mapping a heart transplant. "I take 0.12 grams every third day," he says, tapping on a spreadsheet that tracks mood, creativity, hydration, and the number of times he's remembered to blink. It's all about consistency. You nod politely, he nods enthusiastically. You're not sure either of you understood the conversation. Let's compare this to ancient mushroom use. Thousands of years ago, ceremonies unfolded under starlit skies, guided by spiritual leaders who use mushrooms for healing and connection. Today, someone in a Patagonia vest is chewing half a stem because their productivity coach said it might help them crush Q3 deliverables. The contrast is exquisite. You wander into a meeting room where executives are brainstorming. The walls are covered in sticky notes arranged with a chaotic precision of people who believe innovation is a spiritual calling. Someone has written "disrupt the nature of focus itself" in bold marker. Another note reads, "mushroom-enhanced synergy." A junior employee raises her hand. Maybe we should get more sleep. Her idea is met with the same energy medieval peasants reserve for accidental heresy. Back in the break room, two product designers discuss their morning microdose as casually as others discuss breakfast. "It really helped me enter a state of flow," one says, sipping iced matcha. "I redesigned the entire interface based on fractal geometry." "Oh, cool," the other replies. "Did the users like it?" "They hated it," he says proudly, "but I feel spiritually aligned." You take a seat on one of the giant beanbags scattered around the perimeter. From here, the office looks like a cross between a sci-fi habitat and a kindergarten for adults with severe performance anxiety. A mindfulness coach strolls through, reminding everyone to stretch, breathe, and consider whether their KPIs reflect their sole purpose. Meanwhile, microdosing spreads beyond programmers. Marketing teams begin nibbling. HR begins nibbling. Upper management swears they don't nibble but definitely nibble. People begin using phrases like expanded creativity bandwidth and intuition-driven decision cycles. One engineer confesses, "I wrote code for 6 hours straight and didn't cry once." Breakthrough. But here's the twist. Beneath all the buzzwords, something real is happening. Some employees feel calmer, some feel more open, some feel more connected to their work, not in a capitalistic productivity machine way, but in a maybe I can breathe again way. You watch as a stressed intern takes a tiny dose, sits quietly, and finally unclenches his jaw for the first time since onboarding. He gazes at a houseplant with peaceful affection. "It's like happy to be alive," he whispers. "The plant, for the record, is plastic, but who are you to ruin his moment?" As you leave the office, a founder jogs past you holding a bottle of adaptogenic mushroom water, shouting into a headset, "We're not a tech company, we're a consciousness expansion platform." Silicon Valley, in all its earnest absurdity, has embraced mushrooms not as sacred medicine, not as rebellion, but as another tool for self-improvement. Because here, even enlightenment is something to be optimized. And somewhere deep beneath the kombucha taps and KPI dashboards, a tiny truth glimmers. Even the tech bros are just trying to feel human again. Suddenly, you're in Oregon in 2020, where voters decided mushrooms were probably less scary than daylight savings time. Let's take a breath and step into the mist. Oregon smells like rain, pine needles, and a faint whisper of collective anxiety. You're standing on a quiet street in Portland, surrounded by artisanal coffee shops, vintage stores that sell clothes older than you, and people walking dogs that suspiciously resemble sentient mop heads. It's peaceful, quirky, and surprisingly, on the brink of psychedelic history. Election day has just wrapped up. Campaign signs dot the lawns, some supporting candidates, others promoting ballot measures, and at least one homemade sign reading "Fix the potholes, please." And as the votes roll in, you watch the numbers climb for Measure 109, Oregon's proposal to legalize psilocybin therapy in supervised settings. People stare at the results with mild astonishment, like they're watching an unexpected plot twist on a baking show. Did Oregonians really just do that? Someone murmurs. Yes, another replies, and honestly good for us, because in 2020 everything else was chaos, wildfires, a pandemic, sourdough starter culture becoming a personality test. By comparison, mushrooms look downright wholesome. Let's talk about why this happened. You wander into a cosy living room where a small group gathers for an election night watch party, masked, distanced, and stress-eating homemade brownies. They aren't thrill seekers. They're nurses, teachers, retirees, and at least one exhausted parent who's been homeschooling for 7 months and now believes mushrooms might solve everything, including fractions. They've heard the research, they've seen documentaries, they've watched experts explain that psilocybin therapy can help with depression, addiction, PTSD, and end-of-life anxiety. For many, this wasn't rebellion. It was relief wrapped in science. Now let's step into the government building where officials are preparing to implement the new law. The atmosphere inside is polite confusion mixed with determination. A room full of Oregonians in fleece jackets and sensible footwear sit at conference tables, flipping through thick binders labelled Mushroom Therapy Regulatory Framework. One person raises their hand. So, what exactly counts as a supervised setting? Another flips pages, somewhere soft, preferably with blankets. A third scribbles notes, maybe plants. And honestly, that's fair. Creating the nation's first legal psychedelic therapy program requires careful rule-making. There are discussions about training facilitators, setting dosage standards, establishing safety protocols, ensuring no one accidentally wanders into a Trader Joe's midway through ego dissolution. Practical things. Outside, the public reacts in the most Oregon way possible. Quietly, politely, and with a deep sense of civic mindfulness. Some people say this could heal a lot of suffering. Others say, as long as my rent doesn't go up again, sure. A few mutter, I mean, we already have kombucha breweries on every corner. What's one more wellness trend? Not everyone approves, of course. You overhear a man at a gas station dramatically announcing, "We're letting the fungi run the state now, huh?" His friend shrugs, sipping a lavender cold brew. Could they really do worse than humans? A philosophical question best left for later. But overall, the mood is cautiously hopeful. Training centres open. Facilitator programs launch. People from around the country begin planning healing trips to Oregon. Not the hiking kind, though they'll still pretend it's about hiking on Instagram. You walk into one of the state-approved psilocybin service centres. The space looks like a blend of a yoga studio, a therapist's office, and a Scandinavian spa. Soft lighting, neutral colours, that one chair every wellness influencer owns. A facilitator greets you with the serene smile of someone who has meditated today and wants you to know it. This is where healing happens, they say gently. You nod. It does feel like healing could happen here, or at least a really good nap. And gradually, session by session, story by story, Oregon becomes the quiet epicenter of a psychedelic shift. Not a loud one, not a rebellious one, just a thoughtful, carefully regulated, deeply human exploration of what it means to reconnect. With life, with oneself, with everything that hurts and everything that might be mended. As you step outside into the damp Oregon twilight, rain pattering softly on the sidewalk, you realize something. History books will say psilocybin legalization began with legislation, but really, it began with people, tired, hopeful, brave people, choosing to say, maybe there's a better way, a very Oregon thing to do. In a beautifully decorated clinic, a therapist flips through a wait list so long it looks like ancient scripture. You watch them mutter, "I should have gone into dentistry, let's take in the scene." Softer music plays in the background, the kind of ambient playlist specifically designed to make your shoulders drop several centimetres. The lighting is warm, gentle, and flattering to both humans and houseplants. Crystals sit on bookshelves beside peer-reviewed journals. A weighted blanket rests neatly folded on the couch like a polite emotional support slab. The whole place smells faintly of lavender and the slow burnout of overworked mental health professionals. The therapist, poor soul, is perched at a desk surrounded by binders, sticky notes, herbal teacups, and what appears to be a small shrine dedicated to caffeine. They scroll through their laptop, face illuminated by the glow of names stacked in a digital queue that is by all measurable metrics biblical. If the ancient Egyptians had waiting lists, this is what they would have looked like. Psilocybin therapy is now FDA approved, and everyone wants in. Everyone. Stressed parents, disillusioned tech workers, retired teachers, veterans, people who watched one too many self-help TikToks, people whose childhoods could be described as emotionally interpretive dance, people who are fine but would like to be even more fine, and especially millennials who have decided that as long as brunch prices remain what they are, healing better be an option. You follow the therapist into a hallway lined with soothing artwork, mountains, rivers, one abstract painting that looks suspiciously like a crying potato but is titled Transformation. Every room is booked, every couch is occupied, every pair of noise-cancelling headphones is currently cupping the ears of someone gently confronting the emotional consequences of 1990s parenting styles. Let's compare this to earlier eras of mental health work. In the 1950s, therapists had quiet offices, predictable workloads, and a vague belief that everyone's problems stem from their mother wearing the wrong shoes. In 2025, therapists are running psilocybin sessions that require hours of preparation, supervision, and integration. It's emotionally heavy work, it's delicate work, and suddenly, everyone wants to do it. One therapist passes by, hair frizzed, eyes glazed, clutching a giant thermos labelled Therapist Fuel. Another consultant whispers, "I've slept 3 hours," and walks into a session smiling anyway, because emotional caretakers are powered by compassion and sheer stubbornness. You observe a training seminar in a nearby room. Aspiring facilitators sit attentively while an instructor speaks with the calm of a person who has definitely seen someone cry about a houseplant. "Remember," she says, "your job is presence, not fixing, not interpreting, presence." One student raises a hand. What if they ask the meaning of life? The instructor sighs softly. "Tell them you'll circle back." Back in the lobby, new clients fill out intake forms. One writes, "I want to feel less stressed." Another, "I want to forgive myself." A third simply writes, "My inner child won't stop making threats." Everyone looks tired but hopeful. The modern human condition distilled. The receptionist, bless their soul, manages the chaos with the diplomacy of a medieval priest coordinating a festival. "Earliest available appointment?" someone asks. The receptionist flips through calendars, frowns, consults a lunar chart for emotional effect and says, "I have March of next year." The client nods solemnly. "That's fine. I'll still be emotionally complicated then." Meanwhile, lawmakers and administrators scramble to expand certification programs. Universities announce accelerated training. Retired counsellors are coaxed back into service with promises of flexible schedules and unlimited chamomile tea. Someone jokes that therapists should unionize with baristas since both are now unofficial emotional first responders. And through all of it, the therapists keep showing up, session after session, story after story. Trauma, laughter, grief, breakthroughs. They hold space for people unraveling and reweaving their inner worlds. They carry the privilege and weight of witnessing transformation. At the end of the day, you see the therapists from the opening scene lock up the clinic. They stretch, exhale, and whisper to themselves, "This is worth it. Exhausting, but worth it." And as they walk into the evening air, tired, hopeful, and determined, you realize healing may be slow, growth may be messy, but the world is full of people who have not given up on helping others feel whole, even if the wait list is longer than human history. Dimmed lights, calming playlists, a therapist who looks like they sell crystals at farmers markets. You climb onto a couch and prepare to unravel your psychological IKEA furniture. Let's ease in slowly. The room is warm, but not too warm, the temperature therapists use when they want you to feel safe enough to cry but not sweaty enough to become self-conscious about it. A soft lamp glows in the corner, casting shadows that look vaguely like supportive woodland creatures. The playlist is a curated blend of ambient tones, gentle vibrations, and two songs that suspiciously resemble whales harmonizing about forgiveness. The therapist sits beside you in a mid-century modern chair that probably has opinions about composting. Their presence is calm, steady, and slightly whimsical. They offer you a blanket, a weighted one, because nothing says you're safe to confront your inner chaos like a 20-pound rectangle of cotton. As you settle in, they check your vitals, your comfort level, your breath, your intentions for the session. Just be open, they say softly, but also grounded, but also receptive, but also relaxed. You nod as though you fully understand these instructions, even though your brain is already pretending to reorganize itself alphabetically. Then the dosing begins. The psilocybin is administered with ceremony, professionalism, and the faint scent of lavender diffused discreetly in the background. You swallow, sip water, and lie back as the therapist adjusts the blanket once more, like tucking in a slightly confused child. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happens. You stare at the ceiling. The ceiling stares back. You begin to panic slightly. What if nothing happens? What if everything happens? What if you emotionally unpack something with the structural integrity of old spaghetti? And then something shifts. Not dramatically. Not like a movie where the walls melt or your spirit animal knocks on the window. No, it's subtle. Your breath deepens. The edges of the room soften. The music feels like it's reaching out and patting your hair gently. You exhale, and the exhale seems to have opinions about your childhood. The therapist notices the shift and nods knowingly. They've seen this thousands of times, patients entering the warm, swirling embrace of introspection. Just follow it, they whisper. You're doing great. You're extremely proud of yourself for lying down correctly. Soon, memories inch forward like shy animals. Not painful at first, just curious. The time you were 8 and felt left out. The time your teacher said you were too sensitive and you believed it for 20 years. Moments you forgot existed now float past you like emotional post-it notes. But then the deeper stuff arrives. You start unraveling the big knots, the ones you tucked behind sarcasm, career ambitions, and an unhealthy attachment to productivity apps. The grief you never processed. The fear you pretend doesn't exist. The quiet ache you carry in your chest like a family heirloom. The mushrooms don't judge. They just illuminate. They pull out the drawers of your inner filing cabinet and lay everything neatly on the floor, saying, look, this isn't as scary as you thought. You cry a little, then you laugh a little, then you cry because you laughed. It's emotional Jenga, and you're removing blocks with both hands. The therapist sits nearby, steady as a lighthouse. Every so often they murmur something encouraging like, you're safe, or you're allowed to let that go, or yes, the blanket really is that soft. Hours pass but feel like one long exhale. Eventually the emotional earthquake settles. You feel lighter, not in a floaty way, but in a someone took 3 bowling balls out of my soul kind of way. The world rebuilds itself gently around you, sharper, kinder, quieter. As the session winds down, the therapist offers water, a journal, and the kind of smile that suggests they've just watched a very human miracle unfold. You step back into the room fully, blinking with new clarity. And as you sit up, the therapist says, you did beautifully. You nod because you did. You really did. Even if your psychological IKEA furniture now has 3 leftover emotional screws and no instruction manual, your senses soften, the room melts into warm colours, and your ego decides to take a personal day. It's less rainbow dragons and more gentle cosmic PowerPoint presentation. Let's stroll into this experience slowly. You're lying on a couch, soft, warm, slightly too comfortable, like the furniture equivalent of a reassuring hug. The lighting is dim, and music flows through the air like a friendly fog. Think spacious ambient tracks, the sound of wind brushing through distant trees, and maybe a hint of mystical chimes played by an emotionally available monk. At first it's subtle. You notice your breath deepening, as though your lungs have just remembered a secret about how to work properly. The boundaries of your body soften, your fingertips feel warm. Time becomes stretchy, like a taffy pull of consciousness. Then slowly the room begins to shift, not dramatically. You're not seeing unicorns breakdance, it's more like reality switches to gentle cinematic mode. Colours glow, shadows soften, patterns emerge in the ceiling that you swear weren't there a moment ago. You get the distinct feeling that the lamp in the corner understands you on a deeper level. You close your eyes, and the internal landscape begins. The visuals come first, not chaotic ones, but organised ones. Elegant lines drift across your mind like slides in a cosmic PowerPoint presentation, transitioning with impeccable timing. Shapes glide. Colours bloom. It's soothing, structured, rhythmic. If your mind had a screensaver, this would be it. And then the emotional shift. Your heart opens, not dramatically, but like a door cracking just enough to let in warm sunlight. Feelings you normally keep at a safe distance stroll up, sit beside you and say, "Hey, we should probably talk." Some of them are tender, some are bittersweet. Some are memories wrapped in layers of dust and self-protection. But because the mushrooms soften everything, you approach them with curiosity rather than fear. It's the opposite of panic. It's like therapy wearing soft pajamas. Now comes the dissolving, ego-softening, identity-relaxing, the psychological equivalent of loosening a tight ponytail. You're still you, but the edges blur. Your internal narrator, usually loud and dramatic, steps aside and says, "I'll just take my break now." Without that chatter, the world feels quieter, wider, more spacious. Thoughts don't spiral, they float. You explore feelings without clinging to them. You revisit memories without drowning in them. You understand things, not intellectually, but intuitively, like someone whispering truths directly into your bones. For a moment you sense connection, not the forced kind where someone tells you we're all one and you pretend to feel it. No, this is gentle, organic. You feel woven into something larger. The room, the earth, the people you love, the people you forgot you loved, the entire messy, miraculous fabric of existence. It's not overwhelming, it's comforting. Your body feels safe, warm, held. This is the heart of a psilocybin trip, not spectacle, but softening. Not hallucination, but clarity. A quiet rearranging of emotional furniture. Occasionally small absurdities occur. You find yourself laughing because you remembered a childhood moment with newfound tenderness. Or you tear up because a single piano note reminded you of everything beautiful you've ever experienced. These emotional waves rise and fall naturally, like tides drawn by a moon that genuinely wants the best for you. As the peak begins to fade, you feel grounded again. Your thoughts return one at a time, like polite guests arriving for tea. Your sense of self floats back gently, landing on you with surprising kindness. Even the lamp looks normal again, though you suspect it still cares about your well-being. When you finally open your eyes fully, the world looks the same, but feels different, softer, more breathable. You take a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, it feels like it goes all the way down. That's the thing about a psilocybin trip. It isn't about escaping reality. It's about rediscovering it, with your defenses lowered, your heart open, and your soul finally whispering back. The dragons can wait. The PowerPoint was enough. You encounter a small version of yourself holding a juice box and a list of grievances. We need to talk, they say. First of all, why did we stop colouring? Let's ease into the moment. You're reclining under a blanket, eyes closed, while swirling patterns begin to emerge across the soft landscape of your consciousness. The therapist sits nearby, breathing quietly, giving you space to wander into the deeper rooms of your mind. And this pastel-coloured hallway, carpeted in childhood nostalgia, is one of them. Your inner child stands before you with the unimpressed expression of someone who has seen your browser history. They're short, slightly sticky, children always are, and wearing your favourite childhood outfit, the one with the mismatched colours that somehow made perfect sense when you were 6 and had unwavering self-confidence. They sip their juice box with judgment. You used to be fun, they say, tapping their tiny foot. You made pillow forts. You believed ants had social lives. You cried openly. You forgave quickly. You didn't schedule your joy. You take a breath, or at least you think you do. Breathing feels different in this place, like the air itself has opinions. I grew up, you tell them gently. Your inner child narrows their eyes. Okay, but did you have to grow up that much? Before you can answer, they start listing complaints. Why do you work all the time? Why do we pretend everything is fine when it's very obviously not fine? Why don't we dance in the kitchen anymore? Why did we trade imagination for spreadsheets? Each question lands softly but firmly, like emotional bubble wrap popping in slow motion. You sit down beside them. The floor feels warm and familiar, like the rug in your childhood bedroom, the one with cartoon moons that stared at you lovingly for an entire decade. Your inner child hands you a crayon, not metaphorically, an actual crayon. It smells like wax, sugar cereal, and simpler days. Draw something, they insist. You attempt a heart. It looks more like an asymmetrical potato. They nod approvingly. Not bad. You're rusty, but we can work with that. Let's pause for a modern comparison. In adult life, inner child work usually means reading self-help books, journaling, or crying in your car at 2 p.m. During a lunch break you spent answering emails. But here, on psilocybin, the encounter is literal, direct, unfiltered by logic or shame. Your emotional younger self finally gets a seat at the table, and they brought receipts. The conversation continues. They talk about fears you ignored, dreams you deferred, creativity you buried under obligations. Remember when you wanted to be an astronaut, they ask? You stopped because someone said it was unrealistic. Who cares what they thought? They couldn't even do multiplication. Their tiny voice wavers for a moment. And why did we stop asking for help? You used to ask for help with everything, even tying your shoes. Now you act like being vulnerable will cause the earth to implode. The honesty hits you with surprising tenderness. This isn't shame. It's clarity wrapped in innocence. You realize how much of your adult anxiety stems from trying to protect this child, this tender version of you who felt deeply, loved easily, and wasn't afraid to look silly. Your inner child reaches out and takes your hand. Their palm is warm, small, sincere. It's okay, they say softly. You didn't ruin anything. You just forgot. But I'm still here. The words dissolve something inside you. A tension you've carried for years unclenches, like emotional Velcro releasing. You didn't abandon your inner child. You just stopped listening. For a moment, the two of you sit quietly, drawing nonsense shapes on the metaphorical floor. They giggle at your attempts. You giggle too. It feels ridiculous and perfect. The therapist's voice floats gently through the space, grounding you without breaking the spell. If something feels important, they say, hold on to it. Your inner child stands up, wiping juice off their chin. Before you go, they say, dramatically flipping their grievance list, I have a final request. More fun. Seriously, fun isn't optional. You promise them you'll try. They nod, satisfied, and skip away into the swirling colours, and as the vision fades, you realise something softly profound. Healing isn't always about confronting trauma. Sometimes it's about reconnecting with the version of you who knew joy wasn't something to earn, it was something to live. And yes, you should absolutely start colouring again. Suddenly you're watching memories swirl around like plates in a dishwasher. The mushrooms gently hand you emotional bubble wrap and say, let's clean this up. Let's slow the moment down. You're lying under a soft blanket, eyes closed, breathing deeply as your mind rearranges itself into something between a planetarium and a well-organised garage. The therapist sits silently nearby, present, calm, radiating supportive energy like a human-weighted blanket with a graduate degree. You're safe. You're grounded. You're about to experience something gentle, necessary, and surprisingly well labelled. Inside your mind, things begin to move, not dramatically. Not like an action movie where your memories explode into flaming debris, more like a dishwasher set to the delicate cycle. Images drift, feelings rise and settle, memories shimmer like dishes coated in old emotional spaghetti sauce. And instead of panicking, you feel curious. One memory floats forward, a small one. The time you cried because someone took the red crayon. You didn't think you cared about that anymore. Apparently you do. Another memory drifts into view, sharper, heavier. A moment you never fully processed. A loss, a heartbreak, a disappointment you quietly buried beneath adulthood and a busy schedule. You feel your chest tighten, but softly, like a knot loosening rather than pulling tighter. The mushrooms don't fling these memories at you like a chaotic slideshow. They present them gently, almost lovingly. Would you like to look at this? They seem to ask. Only if you're ready. You realise something. For once, your feelings aren't overwhelming you. They're just there. Sortable, touchable, washable. Let's compare this to normal life. Usually revisiting trauma feels like trying to clean a blender that's still plugged in. Dangerous, messy, and likely to end with you crying on the kitchen floor. But under psilocybin, the blender is unplugged, disassembled, laid out neatly. The trauma feels approachable, not unsolvable. Manageable, not monstrous. You watch as a tender memory surfaces, one you've avoided for years. You prepare yourself for familiar dread, but instead you feel softness. You're revisiting the moment with compassion instead of judgment. It's like looking at a younger version of yourself and saying, "Oh, sweetheart, no wonder that hurt." This is the emotional dishwasher at work. Warm water, safety, gentle cycles, insight, eco-friendly setting, reduced self-blame. As each memory rotates through, bubbles rise, tiny spheres of new understanding. You aren't reliving trauma, you're reprocessing it, reframing it, letting the emotional residue lift off and swirl away. You tear up. Not from pain, but from relief. The body finally releasing something it's held onto for too long. A therapist might call it somatic release. You call it crying in a non-embarrassing way for once. Another memory approaches, one that has been welded to your nervous system for years. You brace. But the mushrooms don't shove it at you. They cradle it. They wrap it in something warm, soft, forgiving. You survived this, they whisper, but you don't have to carry it the same way. You breathe, deeply, fully, like your ribs just remembered they were designed to expand. You watch the memory gently dissolve, not disappear, but lose its sharp corners. It becomes a story, not a wound, something you can hold without bleeding. The cycle continues. Rinse, revisit, release. Your mind feels lighter. Your heart feels less armoured. You're not fixed, not magically healed, but you're unburdened, clarified, rinsed of old emotional grime. As the peak softens, the dishwasher slows. The memories stop spinning. You feel grounded again, as though you've walked through an emotional spa and emerged moisturized. The therapist leans forward slightly. "How are you doing?" they ask. You blink open your eyes, feeling like someone rearranged your inner furniture and finally fixed the wobbly chair of your psyche. "I feel clean," you whisper, and for the first time you really mean it. A moment of clarity washes over you, the kind that makes people quit their jobs, buy a plant and start journaling aggressively. Let's settle into that moment. It comes softly at first, the way sunrise sneaks into a dark room, quiet, patient, not asking permission. You're lying comfortably beneath a weighted blanket, still floating in the warm afterglow of emotional processing. The room feels safe, your breath feels steady, and somewhere deep inside, a truth you've been avoiding gently clears its throat. It's subtle, not a booming revelation from the heavens, more like a whisper from the universe saying, "Hey, you might want to look at this." You sit up mentally, not physically, and observe the shift. Colours seem warmer. Thoughts feel less like tangled headphone wires and more like neatly coiled strings of meaning. The music in your headphones flows as though it understands exactly what emotional frequency you need right now. And then it hits, not like a slap, more like a soft, luminous wave rolling over your entire inner landscape, a clarity that rewires your understanding in real time. The mushrooms have rearranged the emotional Jenga tower and politely removed the blocks labelled avoidance, denial, and "I'll deal with it later." Suddenly, something that used to confuse you now feels painfully, beautifully obvious. Maybe it's, "I deserve kindness," or "I've been carrying someone else's expectations, not my own dreams," or simply, "I need to stop dating people who treat emotional communication like an optional software update." Whatever it is, the truth glows with a gentle certainty. You're not overwhelmed by it, you're illuminated by it. Let's compare this to everyday clarity. In ordinary life, breakthrough thoughts appear while doing chores or taking a shower, and before you can grab a towel, they vanish back into the steam. But on psilocybin, the breakthrough arrives, pulls up a chair and makes eye contact. It stays. It wants to talk. You feel your heart opening like a window that hasn't been unlocked in years. Compassion flows inward, then outward. You think about people you've loved, people who've hurt you, people you've outgrown. You see their humanity and your own woven together in complex, imperfect threads, not with bitterness, with acceptance. You feel forgiveness settle onto old wounds like warm sunlight melting frost. You feel courage rising, not the dramatic kind that makes someone flee to Bali, but the quiet kind that says, "I can do this differently." A therapist sitting nearby notices the shift. They nod gently, as if to say, "There it is, you found it." They don't interrupt. They're trained to spot breakthroughs the way park rangers spot wildlife at dusk, carefully, respectfully. Your mind drifts toward your life outside the session, your job, your relationships, your habits, your boundaries, or lack thereof. Not in a judgmental way, but with the clarity of someone finally looking at their phone screen after cleaning it for the first time in 3 years. You see what needs changing. You see what deserves staying. You see what was never yours to hold in the first place. It's profound, but also gently funny. You laugh softly because the truth isn't harsh. It's just been waiting for you to stop sprinting long enough to notice it. A memory surfaces, a version of you from years ago who knew these truths instinctively before life layered over them with stress, responsibilities, and the belief that growth must always be painful. That younger self smiles knowingly, as if to say, took you long enough. The breakthrough deepens. You realize you're allowed to choose differently. To rest, to dream, to ask for help, to let go, to take up space without apologizing, to live a life that feels like it belongs to you. Tears gather, but not out of sadness, out of recognition. This is clarity not as a lightning strike, but as a warm bath. Not as crisis, but as release. Not as confrontation, but as return. As the moment settles, you feel lighter, emotionally decluttered. Like someone finally updated your internal operating system after years of clicking remind me later. And for the first time in a long time, you know exactly what you need to do next. You smile, breakthrough complete. You sit with a therapist the next day trying to describe your journey. Everything was connected, you say. The therapist nods knowingly. They've heard that 400 times this week. Let's set the stage. You're in a sunny little office with plants thriving on windowsills, as if they've personally absorbed the energy of 1,000 breakthroughs. The air smells like peppermint tea and the mild, comforting exhaustion of someone who stayed up all night rethinking their entire existence. You sink into a soft chair, soft in that therapeutic way where you feel simultaneously held, supported, and slightly more emotional than planned. The therapist sits across from you with a notebook and the serene expression of someone who has become professionally unshockable. They gesture for you to begin, and suddenly you realize there is no concise way to summarize the events of yesterday. You gesture vaguely at the air, hoping the air will help. So everything was connected, you repeat. The therapist smiles. Tell me more. You take a deep breath and attempt to explain how the couch became a metaphor for your relationships, how the music felt like a biography of your emotions, how you forgave your third-grade bully for reasons that still feel spiritually sound. But all your words come out like half-finished origami, impressive in intent, confusing in execution. Integration therapy is like trying to describe a dream that made perfect sense at the time, only now you're awake and wondering why you cried over a metaphorical otter. The therapist leans in gently. Let's start simple. What stayed with you? You sift through the emotional souvenirs from your trip. The moment you realized you've been treating rest like a luxury instead of a biological requirement. The unexpected wave of compassion toward your stressed-out adult self. The hilarious clarity that you might actually enjoy being alive once you stop scheduling every second of it. You try explaining how your ego took a vacation, how your heart stepped into its place, how you felt like a warm, sentient snow globe of insight. The therapist nods, like this is all very standard, which it is, for psilocybin anyway. Let's compare this process to normal life. Integration without therapy looks like journaling at midnight, texting a friend I had a revelation without elaborating, then waking up the next morning unsure if it was enlightenment or dehydration. But with integration therapy, it becomes structured meaning-making. You get to take the cosmic puzzle pieces and arrange them into something you can actually use, something that fits into the life you're returning to. The therapist helps you untangle it all. Yesterday, they say, your defenses were softened. Today, we help translate what you saw into choices you can actually live with. You nod slowly. That sounds reasonable. Adult. Slightly intimidating. You talk about the fears you faced, the ones you normally keep tucked under sarcasm and to-do lists. You talk about moments of peace so deep they felt physically warm. You talk about the way time stretched, softened and flowed until it resembled melted taffy, comforting but also structurally unsound. The therapist asks questions that guide gently, never forcefully. What did you learn? What surprised you? What feels important now? How can you honor what you felt? You realize integration isn't about preserving the magic, it's about applying the wisdom. It's the difference between seeing a beautiful sunset and deciding to go outside more often. Between feeling love during the journey and choosing to love with intention afterward. Some insights are profound. Some are tiny but mighty. Some are maybe I should stop doom scrolling at 2 a.m. All are valid. By the end of the session, your cosmic roller coaster has transformed into something simpler and sturdier. An emotional roadmap marked with turn left toward boundaries, merged gently into self-compassion and caution. Inner child crossing. You leave the office feeling grounded, human, and surprisingly hopeful. And as you walk out into the daylight, you realize something essential. The mushrooms open the door. Integration teaches you how to walk through it without falling on your face. Investors swarm like bees around a very psychedelic flower. Everyone is excited and confused at the same time, like discovering oat milk all over again. Let's step gently into this brave new marketplace. You're standing in a sleek conference hall illuminated by LED lights that are trying very hard to feel futuristic. You're surrounded by people wearing Patagonia vests over button-down shirts, an outfit that silently whispers, "I own equity in something you've never heard of." In the middle of the room is a keynote screen boldly proclaiming the psychedelic economy, a $7 billion frontier, as if healing the human psyche were just another SaaS platform. Investors mingle with the caffeinated intensity of people who've done 3 demos and 1 cold plunge before breakfast. Everyone is talking at once. Someone mutters, "We're in at Series A," while another whispers, "We actually prefer first-mover advantage in mind expansion markets." You're pretty sure no one understands what they're saying, but the enthusiasm is palpable. Let's compare this to other health revolutions. Yoga became a billion-dollar industry. Meditation apps became billion-dollar industries. Oat milk, yes, oat milk, became a billion-dollar industry. So naturally mushrooms, which have been spiritually and therapeutically relevant for thousands of years, are now being branded as the next big consumer pivot. It's capitalism, baby. If it heals you, calms you, or makes you cry in a productive way, someone is absolutely going to put it on a billboard. You wander past a row of exhibition booths. One startup advertises premium ceremonial-grade microdosing capsules in matte black packaging, which is how you know it's expensive. Another boasts an AI-driven psilocybin therapy matching algorithm. A third simply displays mugs and t-shirts with slogans like "Heal the World," "One mushroom at a time," and my ego dissolved and all I got was this tote bag. Investors crowd around a table where a company rep explains vertical mushroom integration, an economic phrase that somehow sounds both impressive and mildly illegal. We grow, cultivate, extract, purify, package, and distribute, he says, chest-puffed. We're basically the Tesla of fungi. Someone nods deeply, as if enlightenment has been achieved. But underneath all the hype, something real is happening. People finally understand that psilocybin therapy isn't fringe, it's evidence-based medicine. Clinics are opening across states. Regulatory guidelines are expanding. Researchers are publishing study after study showing reductions in anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD. Real lives are improving, and naturally that attracts both compassion and capital. You slip into a breakout session where economists are presenting graphs. Lots of graphs. Elegant, colourful, pointy graphs. As you can see, one presenter says, laser pointer trembling with excitement, the projected growth of the psychedelic therapeutics market could outpace the wellness industry by 2032. This is followed by applause that feels slightly unhinged. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner, a small group of clinicians speaks with cautious optimism. We just have to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the cannabis boom, one says. Or the opioid boom, another adds. Or literally any boom where money got involved, the third size. There is hope, though. Many companies genuinely want to expand access, reduce suffering, and make psychedelic therapy safe and affordable. Others simply want to be first on the stock ticker. Both can coexist, apparently, in this strange new marketplace where healing meets venture capital. You pass a whiteboard labelled Disrupting the Future of Consciousness, Ideation Space. On it, someone has written, Make healing scalable, subscription-based self-awareness, monthly ego maintenance plan. It's unclear whether this was brainstorming or satire, and yet, despite the chaos, the energy feels hopeful. People are ready for something better, something gentler, something real. Psilocybin doesn't care about IPOs or shareholder returns, it cares about healing. But if investors want to fight over it like seagulls over a dropped French fry, maybe that's just the price of progress. As you leave the conference hall, a startup founder hands you a brochure promising transformational returns on human potential. You're not sure if that's financial or emotional, but honestly, in 2025, why not both? Mushrooms may not fix capitalism, but capitalism is very, very excited about mushrooms. You sit with former soldiers who've tried every treatment under the sun and found relief in a tiny fungal friend sprouting from cow dung. Let's settle into the room. It's quiet, calm, softly lit. The opposite of every environment these veterans have lived in for the last 15 years. The chairs are comfortably overstuffed. The tea is warm. A Labrador therapy dog naps in the corner, sighing occasionally like it's personally tired of humanity's trauma. And in this safe little haven, men and women who have carried battles in their bodies for decades finally exhale. You listen as one veteran, sleeves rolled to reveal decades of muscle memory, sits forward and says, I didn't think anything could help. He'd tried talk therapy, exposure therapy, medication, meditation apps, long walks, short walks, herbal supplements, ice baths, and that one wellness trend involving screaming into a pillow while sitting in a Subaru. Nothing shifted the weight. Then came psilocybin therapy. The way he describes it is different from anything earlier in this script. There are no cosmic metaphors, no psychedelic fireworks, no visions of hugging lamps or dissolving into the colour purple. Instead, there's stillness, presence, a sense of safety he hadn't felt since before his brain learned to scan every room for exits. It was like the noise turned off, he says quietly. For the first time in years. Another veteran nods. She carries grief in her posture, as though her shoulders have been holding up invisible walls. During the session, she says, I saw things I've been running from, but I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Tears gather, but they're gentle. Not the kind that break people, the kind that open them. Let's compare this to conventional trauma treatment. Usually trauma sits in the body like a heavy stone lodged under the ribs, too painful to touch, too exhausting to avoid. Therapy helps, but slowly. Medications help, but unevenly. Even time itself, the world's oldest healer, often stalls in the face of deep psychological injury. But psilocybin doesn't bulldoze trauma. It softens the ground around it. One veteran describes a moment during their session where they saw a memory they'd avoided for years, a moment of loss, shock, terror. But instead of freezing or spiralling, they felt held by something warm and steady. I could finally look at it, he says, not as a monster, as a memory. It's not magic. It's not instant healing. It's permission. Another veteran chimes in, voice steady but emotional. The mushrooms didn't erase my experiences, she says. They helped me stop reliving them. You hear stories of nightmares fading, hypervigilance easing, buried emotions rising and dissolving like mist. For the first time in years, many of them sleep. Really sleep. Not half-conscious. Not waiting for danger. Not gripping the sheets like parachute cords. One man jokes, I survived firefights, but it was a mushroom that finally made me cry in a way that didn't scare me. Everyone laughs softly. the kind of laughter that releases tension rather than hiding it. A therapist sits nearby, not directing the conversation, just grounding it. Trauma disconnects, they say gently. Psilocybin reconnects to yourself, to your story, to the parts of you that didn't get to grow because survival took priority. The veterans nod. They understand survival better than anyone, and slowly, one by one, they describe a psychological shift that feels subtle but seismic. I didn't feel broken. I forgave myself. I could breathe again. I remembered I'm still alive. You sit in this circle of people who have carried more than most can imagine, and you realize something profound. Healing doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like someone unclenching their jaw after 20 years. Sometimes it looks like a soldier closing their eyes and saying, "I finally feel safe." And sometimes, astonishingly, it begins with a mushroom that grew out of a cow field, waiting patiently for humanity to catch up to its wisdom. Somehow mushrooms went from drugs to therapy faster than avocado toast became a personality trait. Let's step into the present day. You're walking down a busy street lined with yoga studios, artisan bakeries, and cafes with chalkboard signs that say things like, "Try our mushroom latte." Not that kind. The sun is shining, the air smells like espresso and optimism, and for the first time in modern history, discussing psychedelic therapy at brunch does not automatically trigger a concerned phone call from your relatives. In fact, the cultural shift is happening so quickly, it feels like society updated its software overnight. 1 minute, mushrooms were lumped into the same ominous category as gateway drugs, hoverboards, and that one friend who always recommends documentaries about conspiracy theories. The next minute, they're part of a wellness package alongside breathwork sessions and hydration reminders. You overhear conversations everywhere. At a coffee shop, I'm doing my second psilocybin session next week. Oh, nice. I have Pilates at 6 and integration therapy at 8. At a dog park, ever since my mushroom session, I swear my chihuahua and I communicate telepathically. The other person nods politely. This is normal now. At a PTA meeting, my anxiety's been so much better since my mushroom appointment. Someone else replies, "Oh, thank goodness. I thought I was the only one combining trauma healing with school fundraising. The taboo hasn't just softened, it's dissolved like cotton candy in warm water." Let's talk about why this shift feels so seismic. For decades, psychedelics lived under the shadow of moral panic, misinformation, and anti-drug campaigns featuring eggs in frying pans. Now, scientists, therapists, podcasters, celebrities, and your friend Kyle are all gently saying, "Actually, it's pretty helpful." Research studies pile up. Documentaries go viral. Universities form entire psychedelic research centers. Even stodgy medical journals traditionally allergic to anything fun begin publishing articles with phrases like promising therapeutic outcomes and notably improved well-being. Suddenly, mushrooms aren't symbols of counterculture rebellion. They're part of healthcare, which is funny considering centuries of healers, shamans, and spiritual practitioners were already using them responsibly, long before Western society decided to reinvent them like a trendy new smoothie ingredient. You wander into a community event titled Psychedelic Wellness Education Night, where someone in a linen shirt draws diagrams on a whiteboard about neuroplasticity. The vibe is gentle TED Talk meets farmer's market. People sip tea, someone knits silently. A golden retriever lounges in the corner, radiating approval. The speaker asks how many attendees have booked a psilocybin appointment. Dozens of hands go up without shame, hesitation, or the need for sunglasses and anonymity. It feels friendly, almost casual, like raising your hand to say you've tried a new kombucha flavor. Let's compare this to the era of taboo. Years ago, admitting you took mushrooms was like confessing you'd robbed a bank, joined a cult, or eaten an entire family-sized bag of chips alone, dramatic, shameful, definitely frowned upon. Now? People add mushroom session to their Google calendars next to dentist appointments and oil changes. You scroll through social media and see posts like "had my first psilocybin therapy session. Life-changing." Underneath, "Congratulations. So proud of you." What playlist did they use? Normalization isn't just happening, it's thriving. Even employers get in on the trend. Corporate wellness initiatives begin offering seminars titled Psychedelic-assisted stress relief. Let's talk about it. HR departments, once known for beige walls and fear, start circulating articles on the mental health benefits of psilocybin therapy. One particularly ambitious company even offers optional integration circles during lunch breaks. Attendance is surprisingly high. But the most heartwarming change: people talk about their healing openly. They tell friends, they tell partners, they tell parents who grew up on anti-drug PSAs and expected mushrooms to turn people into woodland creatures. And instead of judgment, they hear support. "I'm glad it helped you. You seem lighter. You're finally sleeping. I'm happy for you." By the time you sit down in your own therapist's office, the shift feels complete. They ask, "Have you considered psilocybin therapy?" with the same calm tone they'd use to suggest yoga or fiber supplements. The taboo door didn't just open, it swung off its hinges and was promptly recycled. And now, mushrooms aren't counterculture. They're part of Tuesday, part of healing, part of a culture finally learning that softness can be powerful and growth doesn't have to be hidden in the dark. You wander into a town hall meeting where people insist mushrooms will summon demons, end society, or make teenagers too emotionally intelligent. Let's step inside. The meeting takes place in a fluorescent-lit community centre where the chairs are metal, the coffee is burnt, and the emotional temperature is somewhere between mildly alarmed and full medieval hysteria. You take a seat in the back as townspeople shuffle in carrying clipboards, homemade protest signs, and the kind of righteous certainty usually reserved for traffic disputes. A man at the podium clears his throat dramatically. "We must stop the mushrooms," he declares, "before they destroy the fabric of civilization." He pauses, waiting for applause. None arrives. A woman in the front row adjusts her reading glasses and asks, "How, exactly?" He stammers. "Through mystical influence." The audience murmurs, impressed or confused, hard to tell. Someone else stands. "If we allow psilocybin therapy, what's next? Calm teenagers? Emotionally regulated adults? People apologizing for things instead of suppressing feelings like our ancestors intended?" A gasp ripples through the room. You try not to laugh, because technically this is a serious meeting, but the concerns are drifting into folklore territory. One elderly man flips through a packet of research printed entirely from 2003 internet forums. "This says mushrooms open portals," he warns. "Portals to feelings." Everyone shudders as if he said portals to tax audits. Let's compare this to earlier cultural panics. In the 1930s, jazz music was the downfall of society. In the 1950s, comic books were corrupting the youth. In the 1990s, video games were summoning violence. Now, apparently, mushrooms threaten to make people reflective, emotionally present, and less reactive, which, if you think about it, is the exact opposite of societal collapse. Yet the fear feels familiar. Society has always struggled with things it can't categorize neatly. Psilocybin sits in that uncomfortable zone where it's part medicine, part spiritual tool, part misunderstood fungus that grows out of cow dung. People fear what they don't understand, especially if it could improve the emotional intelligence of their cousin Larry, who has never once processed a feeling on purpose. A woman stands now, clutching her purse as if mushrooms might leap out of the carpet. If we normalise therapy using fungi, what stops the children from thinking it's cool, she asks. Next thing you know, they'll be talking openly about their emotions at dinner. Someone in the crowd audibly whispers, "Not at my table." Another man raises his hand nervously. "My nephew tried mushrooms once," he says. "Now he gardens. A lot. We're very worried." A local pastor steps up to the microphone. He speaks calmly, kindly. "Maybe," he begins, "this is simply another tool for healing." The crowd stiffens in unison, as if the word healing were an accusation. But what if he continues gently? Mushrooms help people let go of trauma. Someone yells, "That sounds like sorcery." You watch as the debate swirls like a confused tornado. Skeptics cite studies they didn't read. Critics worry about slippery slopes. Today, mushrooms. Tomorrow, society collapses into kindness. Meanwhile, a tiny group in the corner tries to explain the real science. Neuroplasticity, decreased activity in the default mode network, reduced depression. They're immediately drowned out by a man shouting, "My cousin saw God. That's too powerful." To be fair, some panickers have legitimate questions. How do we regulate it? Who gets access? What if people misuse it? These are important concerns buried under layers of dramatic frosting. But here's something tender you notice. Beneath all the noise, beneath the fear and the theatrics, these people are afraid of losing what feels familiar. Change, even good change, rattles the walls of old beliefs. A woman speaks softly into the microphone. "My daughter did a therapy session," she says. "She's lighter." She laughs again. The room falls quiet. Even the panickers pause. The silence is warm, tentative, human. "So maybe," she continues, "maybe it's not the end of the world. Maybe it's a beginning." The meeting disperses slowly. Some people leave shaking their heads. Some leave thoughtful. A few leave you Googling. What is psilocybin actually? In the parking lot. And as you step out into the night air, you realise something. Cultural change always comes with resistance. Healing is intimidating, and nothing scares people quite like the possibility of becoming emotionally healthier, except maybe demons, according to the guy with a packet. The world around you brightens. Scientists, therapists, and ordinary people stand at the threshold of a new era, one that might finally treat mental health with the seriousness and softness it deserves. Let's take a slow, gentle step into this vision. You're watching the world shift, not in a dramatic sci-fi way with glowing portals and futuristic uniforms, but in the quiet, human way that real revolutions always begin. Clipboards, thoughtful conversations, community meetings where someone inevitably brings snacks, research labs humming softly with machines that have complicated names, rooms filled with people who are tired of suffering and ready for something better. This future isn't shiny, it's warm. Imagine a decade from now. You walk into a typical mental health clinic, not a sterile space with buzzing lights and uncomfortable chairs, but a place intentionally designed for healing. Soft colours, peaceful music, therapists trained not only in trauma but in compassion. And on the menu of treatment options, right beneath cognitive behavioural therapy and right above meditation classes, sits psilocybin-assisted therapy, not niche, not taboo, just normal. Let's compare this to the past. For centuries, society treated mental health like an afterthought, something to hide, something shameful, something in your head that you should just power through like a bad haircut. But now, the paradigm is shifting. People are recognizing that mental health isn't a luxury. It's the foundation on which every other part of life sits, wobbly or otherwise. You wander through a futuristic conference centre. Futuristic meaning it has very good snacks and plenty of electrical outlets. Researchers present studies with glowing enthusiasm. charts showing decreased depression, reduced PTSD symptoms, improved emotional resilience. Therapists share stories of patients who rediscovered their capacity to feel joy. Patients share stories of rediscovering themselves. Someone on stage says, "We used to treat symptoms, now we treat the whole person." The audience nods. Someone wipes away a tear. Someone else raises their phone to take notes but gets distracted because they suddenly remember they should call their mum. But this future isn't just happening in clinics and labs. It's happening at home. Parents talk to their kids about mental health without whispering. Couples attend integration sessions together to work on communication. Older adults, who grew up in a time when therapy was something only other people did, find themselves embracing new tools that help them soften their grief, loneliness, or regret. Veterans finally access treatments that offer real relief. Emergency responders allow themselves to feel again. Teachers learn how trauma affects the brain. Communities become gentler, a little more patient, a little more aware that everyone carries invisible weights. And in the background of all this, quietly but powerfully, mushrooms help. Not by erasing problems, not by promising salvation, but by opening the door a crack, just enough to let in light, insight, and the simple truth that healing is possible. You sit on a bench watching the imagined future unfold. People walk by smiling, not in a forced Instagram caption kind of way, but in a grounded, relieved, I've been through things and I'm okay kind of way. It's subtle, but unmistakable. A culture that no longer treats emotional pain like a moral failure is a culture that finally knows how to take care of itself. The question, of course, is whether mushrooms will rewrite modern mental health. Maybe, maybe not. But you can see glimmers of an answer in the way people interact, in the growing softness, in the scientific curiosity, in the political momentum, in the urgent desire to do better for the next generation than was done for the last. Psilocybin isn't the whole solution, but it's a doorway, one of many that leads toward a kinder, wiser, more whole version of society. As you watch this imagined future unfold, the light grows brighter around you. Not blinding, just warm, like hope that finally feels practical, like healing that no longer feels out of reach. You take a deep breath, and in that breath, the future feels possible. You find yourself seated at a long mahogany table beside executives who haven't blinked since 2014. Someone clicks a PowerPoint titled Q3 Emotional Resilience Optimization, and suddenly a CFO is explaining how psilocybin reduced his urge to yell at printers. The room smells faintly of toner and quiet desperation. Let's take in the scene. It's a corporate conference room, the kind where time feels elastic and the thermostat is always set to glacial tundra. A bowl of untouched granola bars sits in the centre of the table, flanked by personalised water bottles and the slow-burning anxiety of people who haven't taken a real vacation since the Obama administration. You've never seen so many carefully moisturised foreheads, furrowed with existential dread. At the head of the table sits the CEO, wearing a suit that cost more than your car, and an expression that says, if synergy doesn't improve soon, I will disintegrate. He clears his throat as the CFO continues speaking, clicking through slides with phrases like enhanced empathy metrics and psychedelic-based leadership development outcomes. It's surreal, it's corporate, it's accidentally wholesome. Because for the first time in recorded history, a room full of executives is sincerely discussing their feelings, not because HR demanded it, but because psilocybin therapy forced open emotional doors none of them realised were welded shut. The CFO adjusts his glasses. I used to feel a burning rage toward the office printer, he says. Now I just accept it for what it is. A flawed but trying machine. Several executives nod with the solemn understanding of people who have also fought unwinnable battles with technology. A marketing director chimes in. After my session, I apologise to my team for using the phrase circle back 17 times in one meeting. There's a collective gasp. That kind of vulnerability hasn't been seen in the corporate world since someone called lunch a break instead of a nutritional productivity window. Let's compare this to the old workplace culture. Back then, emotions were things you hid in your desk drawer next to the emergency chocolate and your hopes of career advancement. Executives believed vulnerability was a personal weakness, the same way they believed working fewer than 60 hours a week was a moral failing. But now, psilocybin has gently pried them open like antique jars, revealing, to everyone's shock, that they do in fact have hearts. One executive clears her throat. My mushroom session helped me realise I treat deadlines like they're living entities out to kill me. She flips to a slide of a cartoon deadline with angry eyebrows. I'm working on that. The HR director leans forward with the intensity of a person who hasn't blinked since slide 4. We've seen reductions in workplace conflict, decreases in burnout, and a 47% drop in employees crying silently at their desks, she announces proudly. The room murmurs approvingly. Even the CEO's jaw unclenches a millimetre. But there are skeptics. A man in a pinstripe suit raises his hand. Is this appropriate, he asks, clutching his copy of The 7 Habits of Highly Anxious People like a lifeline. Should executives really be having spiritual breakthroughs before quarterly earnings reports? The room turns to him calmly. Yes, says the CEO, who now exudes the serenity of a man who has recently forgiven his father, his ex-wife, and the supply chain crisis. Absolutely yes. Another executive shares how mushrooms helped him stop taking office politics personally. Turns out, he says, eyes wide with revelation, nobody was plotting against me. They were just tired. The board nods vigorously. Exhaustion is the one universal language of corporate life. The PowerPoint ends with a final slide. Next steps. Workplace compassion implementation timeline. The CEO stands, hands resting on the table. This, he says, might actually change how we lead, how we work, how we treat each other. The room falls quiet. Not the tense, productivity-anxious quiet of a typical board meeting, but the warm, thoughtful quiet of people realizing they might finally stop living like spreadsheets wearing suits. As you leave the boardroom, you realize something improbable. Psilocybin didn't just enter the workplace. It entered the culture of work itself, softening it, reshaping it, reminding even the sternest executives that humanity is not a liability to manage, but a resource to cherish. And somewhere inside that conference room, a printer quietly sighs in relief. Welcome to a forest lodge filled with weighted blankets, herbal teas, and guests named things like Moon, Sparrow, and Steve from accounting. You join a circle of adults pretending they aren't terrified of sharing their feelings, preparing for a guided journey that promises inner rebirth and possibly mild nausea. Let's take in the environment. The lodge sits nestled among towering pines, the kind of trees that look like they've been quietly judging humanity for centuries. The air smells like rain, cedar, and the faint emotional vulnerability of people who spent the drive here, rehearsing how to say I'm fine convincingly. The retreat leaders float around in flowing fabrics, exuding the soft, serene energy of people who have never yelled at a customer service agent. Inside, the common room is decorated with Himalayan salt lamps, inspirational posters, your soul called, it wants you to hydrate, and rugs woven in patterns that are either deeply symbolic or purchased on clearance. Everyone sits in a circle on cushions that squeak when you shift, creating tiny moments of communal shame. The facilitator, a person named Luminaria who introduces herself as a heart space architect, invites everyone to share why they're here. Moon says she's seeking clarity. Sparrow says he'd like to reconnect with joy. Steve from accounting says he just needs a break, which is retreat speak for my therapist told me to do this or I'm in trouble. You introduce yourself. I'm also here. Heads nod. They understand. Luminaria explains the schedule. Meditation at sunrise, mindful walks through the woods, journaling prompts designed to make you cry gently, and a group ceremony featuring psilocybin tea served in rustic handmade cups. The goal is inner rebirth, which sounds promising but also slightly like a warranty issue. As you prepare for the journey, anxiety trickles through the room like a polite ghost. People adjust their blankets, sip chamomile, and avoid eye contact. The bravest among them ask practical questions. How intense will it be? Luminaria smiles mysteriously, as intense as your heart allows. No one finds this helpful. The journey begins in a softly lit lodge room that looks like a cross between a yoga studio and an anthropology museum. Candles flicker. A playlist of soothing flute music intertwines with occasional whale noises that feel emotionally supportive but also a little judgmental. You sip the psilocybin tea alongside everyone else. It tastes earthy, warm, and vaguely like spiritual compost. The facilitators encourage you to lie back, breathe deeply, and trust the unfolding, instructions that would feel ominous in any other setting. As the effects rise, people begin drifting into their inner worlds. Moon curls up like a peaceful woodland creature. Sparrow whispers something philosophical about trees. Steve from accounting stares at his hands like he's discovering fingers for the first time. You feel your own edges soften, your thoughts stretching like warm saltwater taffy. Memories surface, not harshly, but gently, like distant relatives showing up unexpectedly but bringing snacks. Emotions swirl. At one point you become convinced that the lodge rug is explaining the meaning of life through geometric shapes. You nod politely, as if this is common courtesy. The facilitators move quietly between guests, adjusting blankets, offering reassurance, honouring whatever unfolds. No one judges, not even when a man named River announces that he has finally forgiven his high school gym teacher. As the journey deepens, something unexpected happens. The fear dissolves, slowly, softly. The thoughts you were afraid of turn out not to be monsters, but small, tired parts of yourself asking to be heard. You listen, you breathe, you let them go. By evening, the group gathers again, eyes red, hearts open, wrapped in blankets like emotional burritos. People share insights between sips of ginger tea. I realised I don't have to fix everything, one woman says. I let myself cry for the first time in 10 years, another adds. Steve from accounting beams. I hugged a tree and it hugged me back emotionally. Everyone nods. This checks out. As night settles over the lodge, the retreat feels less like a group of strangers and more like a tiny temporary community stitched together by shared courage and mild nausea. And you realise something quietly extraordinary. People didn't come here to escape their thoughts. They came to finally stop running from them. And somewhere in the forest the trees approve. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your blankets and feel your mind grow quiet, take a moment to breathe in everything we wandered through together. The ancient ceremonies, the misguided banishments, the secret therapists working in dimly lit basements, the scientists rediscovering old wisdom, the modern clinics with soft blankets and playlists curated by someone who definitely owns too many houseplants, all of it part of this strange, funny and kind of beautiful journey back to ourselves. Because the story of magic mushrooms isn't just about medicine or policy or research, it's about people. People who are hurting, people who are curious, people who are brave enough to sit with their own minds and see what was waiting there. People who carried trauma for decades and finally set it down. People who met their inner child and apologized for forgetting their joy. People who let themselves feel something again after years of numbness. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity of it all. the bureaucrats debating fungi, the tech bros microdosing to optimize blinking, the grandparents sipping psilocybin tea during bingo night. But beneath the humour is something surprisingly tender. The reminder that healing rarely arrives in the shape we expect. Sometimes it looks like therapy, sometimes it looks like medicine, and sometimes it looks like a mushroom growing quietly in the dark. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep in a clean bed with soft sheets, warm air, and a thermostat that does not require fire rituals or permission from the medieval church, maybe whisper a quiet thank you for the scientists, the healers, the ancient cultures who understood more than we gave them credit for, and for your own resilience in making it to another night. Because history may be messy and hilarious, but it's also a reminder that people are stubborn, hopeful, and forever searching for something that helps us feel a little more whole. Good night.